The billionaire's voice trembled as he asked, "Why didn't you use it to save her?" The little girl just looked up, her small hands clutching the hem of her worn coat. "Because Grandma said, if you take what isn't yours, you lose what matters most." Those words shattered the silence in that police station and broke the man's heart. But to understand why he cried, we have to go back to where it all began beneath the shadow of the Golden Gate Bridge on a cold San Francisco morning. Before you judge her choice, stay until the end. You won't believe what she did next. The sky was a pale gray that morning, the kind that smelled of salt and rain. 6-year-old Lila Reyes stirred awake to the sound of her grandmother coughing, a dry, raspy sound that echoed through their tiny trailer in Daly City. The girl didn't cry anymore when she heard it. She just moved quietly the way she'd learned, pulling her oversized hoodie over her tangled hair before slipping into her worn sneakers. "Morning, Grandma," she whispered, kneeling beside the narrow bed where Elena Reyes lay, pale and weak. "I'm going to collect bottles before school starts." Elena smiled faintly, her thin hand finding Lila's cheek. "My brave girl. Be careful near the bridge, okay? And remember what I always tell you." Lila nodded. "If something isn't earned with clean hands, it'll poison your soul." She said it like a promise. Elena closed her eyes, and Lila picked up her cloth bag and slipped outside into the fog. Under the bridge, the world was different. The rumble of cars above the crash of waves, below the smell of wet metal and gasoline. It was where Lila searched for hope in the form of cans and bottles, each one worth a few cents closer to saving her grandmother's life. The doctors at San Francisco General had said Elena needed heart surgery soon. Without it, there wasn't much time left. Every morning, Lila worked the same route behind cafes near the tourist docks, even the alleys behind Fisherman's Wharf. She was fast and clever, avoiding the older men who sometimes tried to take her collection. She didn't mind the cold or the cuts from broken glass. What scared her was time, the kind that ran out without warning. By noon, her bag was half full, but her hands were freezing, her breath turning to mist. She was about to head home when something shiny caught her eye behind a recycling bin. At first, she thought it was just a piece of metal. Then she saw the handle, a silver briefcase, the kind she'd only seen on TV. She hesitated, glancing around. The alley was empty. She knelt, touching the cold steel with trembling fingers. The latch wasn't locked. It clicked open easily. Inside were neat stacks of $100 bills, bundled thick, endless. Her breath hitched. Her little brain tried to count, but the number didn't fit inside her head. Tucked between the bills was a sleek black card with silver lettering, Ethan Ward, Ward Tech Ventures. She had no idea who that was. She only knew one thing: this was more money than she could ever dream of. For a moment, she just stared. Then her thoughts turned to her grandmother, the hospital room, the unpaid bills, the empty kitchen. This could save her, she whispered. She imagined Elena smiling again, cooking the rice and beans they loved, maybe even having a real house with walls that didn't leak. Tears filled her eyes. It would be so easy. No one had seen her. She could drag it home, hide it, change everything. But then she heard Elena's voice in her head again. If something isn't earned with clean hands. Lila froze. Her chest tightened, torn between love and fear. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "But it's not stealing if we need it, right?" she whispered to the wind. No answer came, only the sound of seagulls and distant horns. Her stomach churned. She closed the briefcase, slowly pressing her small fingers against the cold metal. "Grandma wouldn't want this," she said finally, voice breaking. Then she did something most adults wouldn't have done. She decided to give it back. The case was heavy, far too heavy for her tiny arms, but she dragged it anyway down the wharf across Market Street, her sneakers scraping against the pavement. People stared, but no one stopped to help. She stumbled twice, skinning her knees, but kept going. When she reached the steps of the police station, she could barely stand. Inside, the fluorescent lights felt too bright. A tall officer with kind eyes looked down at her. "Hey, sweetheart, you okay? What's in the bag?" Lila pointed to the briefcase out of breath. "I found it near the pier. There's money inside. A lot." The officer's expression shifted from curiosity to shock. They opened it together, the bills spilling like green waterfalls across the desk. "Where did you say you found this?" he asked, eyes wide. "Behind the recycling bins," she said, biting her lip. "I didn't take anything. I just thought it belonged to somebody important." Another officer murmured, "There's nearly $250,000 here." The first one knelt beside her. "You could have kept it, kid. Nobody would have known." Lila met his gaze, her small voice steady. "But I would have known. And my grandma says, money that isn't yours never makes you happy." The station fell silent. The officer stared at her for a long moment, then smiled gently. "What's your name?" "Lila. Lila Reyes." He picked up the phone and said, "Get Mr. Ethan Ward down here. We found his case and a little hero." That night, the story spread across the city. A 6-year-old girl found a fortune and returned it. But Lila didn't care about news or praise. She just wanted her grandma to live. When Ethan Ward finally walked into the station, young, wealthy, dressed in a sharp gray suit, he saw the tiny girl sitting on a bench. Her knees bruised her eyes, exhausted but proud. He knelt in front of her, disbelief and awe in his voice. "You found my money, honey handan, and brought it back." "Why?" Lila lifted her chin, her voice barely a whisper. "Because Grandma says if you take what isn't yours, you lose what really matters." And for the first time in years, the billionaire felt something stir inside him, a crack in the walls he'd built around his heart. He didn't know it yet, but this little girl would change his life forever. When Ethan Ward walked into the police station that night, everything in him expected another headline. Maybe a scam. Maybe some publicity stunt. But what he saw was a little girl with scraped knees and a steady gaze that cut right through his cynicism. She sat on a wooden bench, clutching a cloth bag of bottles beside her like it was treasure. The silver briefcase sat on the table next to her, untouched. For a moment, Ethan forgot how to speak. The officer cleared his throat. "Mr. Ward, this young lady's the one who found your case down at the pier. She dragged it all the way here by herself." Ethan turned to the girl, still stunned. "You could have kept it," he said softly. "Why didn't you?" Lila looked up, her dark eyes serious. "Because it wasn't mine." It was such a simple answer, but it hit him harder than any boardroom speech or investor pitch ever had. He crouched down to her level. "What's your name?" "Lila Reyes." "And where's your mom or dad, Lila?" She hesitated, glancing at the floor. "It's just me and Grandma Elena." Ethan nodded slowly. There was something in her tone, not self-pity, just matter-of-fact strength. He straightened up and turned to the officer. "How much is in there?" "About 250 grand, the officer replied. "You dropped it near Fisherman's Wharf. Probably during that investor meet you had at the hotel." Ethan exhaled sharply. He hadn't even realized it was gone until his assistant called frantically an hour earlier. But now, seeing this child who could have changed her life forever, and didn't, it shook him. "Officer," he said, "can I have a few minutes with her?" The man nodded and stepped aside. Ethan sat across from Lila. "Tell me something," he said. "You knew what was inside, right?" "Yes, and you still brought it here." She nodded, hugging her bag closer. "Grandma says money that doesn't come from clean hands turns into something bad, like a shadow that follows you forever." Ethan studied her. "You believe that I don't know," she whispered. "But Grandma does, and she's never wrong." There was a silence between them, the kind that humbles you. Finally, Ethan reached into his jacket, pulled out a checkbook, and began to write. Then your grandma deserves to know what kind of granddaughter she raised. When he handed her the check, she frowned. What's this, a reward for your honesty? Her eyes widened. But isn't that wrong too? Ethan smiled faintly. No, Lila. This time, it's the right way. You earned this by doing the right thing. She bit her lip unsure, but after a moment she nodded and accepted it with both hands. Thank you, sir. Ethan's chest tightened. You call me Ethan, okay? She smiled for the first time, a small, shy smile that seemed to light up the dull station. It should have ended there. He could have gone home, poured himself a drink, and moved on. But something about that girl wouldn't leave his mind. Maybe it was the bruises on her arms, or the way she said we when she talked about her grandma, as if the two of them were one. Maybe it was the fact that she reminded him of someone he'd been long before. Success hardened him. A kid who once believed doing right mattered more than doing well. An hour later, Ethan found himself sitting in his car outside the Reyes trailer park. The police officer, whose name was Harris, had insisted on driving Lila home first. Ethan had followed, saying he wanted to make sure the delivery got home safely. It wasn't much of a neighborhood. Rusted mailboxes, cracked pavement laundry lines stretched between power poles. Lila jumped out of the police car, clutching her cloth bag. When she turned to wave goodbye, Ethan saw the faint smile again, small but genuine. He didn't know what came over him, but he got out of the car. Wait, he called. Can I meet your grandmother? Lila hesitated, then nodded. She's probably awake. She likes visitors. Inside the trailer, the air smelled faintly of mint tea and old books. The walls were lined with faded photos. An elderly woman sat up in bed, a wool blanket around her shoulders. Despite her frailty, her eyes were alive with warmth. Grandma Lila said proudly, "This is Mr. Ethan. He's the man whose suitcase I found." Ethan stepped forward, uncertain how to act. He'd shaken hands with presidents and CEOs, but this felt different. "It's an honor to meet you, ma'am. Your granddaughter. She's remarkable." Helena smiled. "So are you for coming here yourself." Her voice was soft but steady. "Most rich men send someone else to do their thanking." Ethan chuckled awkwardly. "I suppose that's true." She motioned toward a chair. "Sit. Would you like some tea? It's not fancy, but it's warm." He sat, watching her pour from an old kettle into 2 chipped mugs. Her hands trembled, yet her movements had grace. "I don't have much," she said, handing him a cup, "but what I have I share." Ethan took a sip. It was sweet, earthy nothing like the imported blends he kept at home. "It's perfect," he said, and he meant it. They talked for a while about Lila, about the city, about how hard times had a way of making people kinder or colder. Elena said, "I tell her every day, Ethan, the world can take your money, your house, your health, but not your integrity. That's the only thing no one can steal." Ethan set his cup down. "She listens to you." Elena smiled. "Children don't always do what you say, but they become what you are." Something inside him shifted. He had spent his life chasing deals, building companies, earning power, yet in this tiny trailer surrounded by people who had nothing. He felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. When he stood to leave, Lila walked him to the door. "Will you come back?" she asked hopefully. He hesitated, then smiled. "Maybe I will." Outside, the night air was cold, but he barely noticed. As he reached his car, Officer Harris leaned against his patrol vehicle, watching. "Kid's something else, huh?" "Yeah," Ethan said quietly. "She is." Harris nodded toward the trailer. "That girl could have taken the easy road, but she didn't. Reminds me that not everyone's lost their compass." Ethan's gaze lingered on the flickering light through the trailer window. Maybe she's the reason I'll find mine again. Driving home through the fog, he couldn't shake the sound of Elena's voice, steady, wise, unbroken by hardship. He thought of the silver briefcase, the money he almost lost, and the truth he'd nearly forgotten, that wealth meant nothing if it didn't make you better. He had no idea yet that this encounter would alter every decision that followed, that the little girl with dirt-streaked cheeks and the grandmother with trembling hands were about to rebuild not just their lives, but his heart. Ethan Ward wasn't used to silence. His life was built on noise meetings, phones, the hum of power that came from being needed every second of the day. But that night after leaving the Reyes trailer, his house in Pacific Heights felt unbearably quiet. The city lights sparkled beyond the tall windows, yet they gave him no comfort. For the first time in years, he didn't pour a drink or check his emails. He just sat there staring at the reflection of a man he no longer recognized. He'd grown up poor himself, though few knew that. A foster home in Bakersfield, a scholarship, a relentless hunger to never feel powerless again. He had turned that hunger into brilliance, into Ward Tech, into an empire. People called him the self-made prodigy. But what no one saw was how much he had given up to get there. The walls he built to keep out pain had kept out everything else, too. Kindness, trust, love. He'd forgotten how to feel. Now, a 6-year-old with a dirt-smudged face had cracked those walls with a single act of honesty. For 2 days, Ethan couldn't focus. He replayed Lila's words over and over. Money that doesn't come from clean hands turns into something bad. He didn't even believe in fate, but somehow that sentence followed him everywhere, into boardrooms, through traffic, even in his sleep. It echoed like something he was meant to hear long ago. On the 3rd morning, he made a call. "Get me Dr. Patel from San Francisco General," he told his assistant. "Cardiology department." Within an hour, he was sitting in a sterile hospital office across from a calm, dark-eyed woman who seemed to already know why he was there. "You're here about Elena Reyes," she said. "Her granddaughter mentioned your name." Ethan nodded. "She told me her grandmother needs heart surgery." "Is that true?" Dr. Patel folded her hands. "Severe valve failure. The surgery could extend her life by years, but they don't have insurance. The estimate is around $80,000, maybe more, with recovery care." Ethan leaned forward. "What happens if she doesn't get it soon?" "She doesn't survive the winter," Dr. Patel said plainly. He looked down, jaw tightening. What if the hospital received an anonymous donation? Could that cover her treatment? The doctor studied him for a moment before nodding. "We've had that happen before. If you wish to remain anonymous, we can arrange that." "Do it," he said quietly, "and make sure they don't know who paid for it." As he left the hospital, the decision felt strangely natural. Not a grand gesture, not charity, but something he had to do. Yet deep down, he also knew it wasn't just about saving a woman's life. It was about saving something inside himself. That evening, he returned to the Reyes trailer. The door opened before he could knock. Lila stood there, her eyes lighting up in surprise. "Ethan," she said, "Grandma's feeling better today. She'll be so happy you came." Inside, Elena was sitting up knitting by the window. She looked stronger than before, though her breathing was still shallow. "Mr. Ward," she said warmly, "you came back." "I said I would," he replied with a smile, setting a small grocery bag on the table. "I brought some things, fresh fruit soup and tea." "I hope that's okay." Elena's eyes softened. "It's more than okay, thank you." They talked for a while about simple things, the weather, the city, the way Lila had been collecting shells near the bridge. At one point, Lila disappeared into the other room to fetch something. When she returned, she handed Ethan a small object, a brass compass, its glass scratched and edges worn. "Grandma gave it to me," she said proudly. It always points north even when you get lost. She says it's not for directions, it's for decisions. Ethan turned it in his hands, feeling the cool metal against his skin. "It's beautiful," he said. "You can borrow it," she offered, "in case you ever forget where to go." He looked up at her, that wide-eyed sincerity, and for the first time in years his throat tightened. "Thank you, Lila. I'll take good care of it." Later that night, Ethan sat alone in his car outside the trailer park, holding the compass. It pointed north, steady and sure, just like the little girl who'd handed it to him. Somewhere inside, he felt a pull he couldn't explain, not towards success or profit, but towards something cleaner, something right. The next week he received a call from Dr. Patel. "The surgery is scheduled for Friday," she said. "Your donation covered everything, pre-op, post-op medication, even home care. You did a good thing, Mr. Ward." Ethan hung up slowly. He didn't feel proud. He felt humbled. When he visited the hospital that weekend, he told the staff he was there to deliver a care package from the donor program. Elena was asleep, her body frail but peaceful. Lila sat beside her, coloring on a piece of paper. She looked up when she saw him and smiled shyly. "Grandma's going to get better," she said. "A kind person from the hospital is helping us." "That's wonderful," Ethan replied, his voice low. Lila looked at him for a long time, then tilted her head. "You look like you've been crying," she said innocently. He chuckled softly. "Maybe I have." She didn't ask why. She just nodded as if she understood anyway. Before leaving, he looked back once more at the sleeping woman and the little girl sitting faithfully by her side. And in that moment, Ethan Ward, the man who built towers of glass and steel, felt something inside him break open. It wasn't weakness. It was the return of something he'd buried long ago. That night, he placed the brass compass on his nightstand. Its needle glowed faintly under the lamplight, steady and unmoving, pointing north. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't fall asleep thinking about his next deal. He thought about a girl who returned what wasn't hers, a grandmother who offered tea in chipped cups, and a truth too simple for billionaires to remember. Sometimes the richest thing you can do is feel again. The rain had stopped by dawn, but the city was still dripping with the sound of renewal. San Francisco shimmered under a pale sky, the streets glistening as though the world had been washed clean. Inside the cardiac wing of San Francisco, General Ethan Ward stood outside room 412, his hands in his pockets, watching through the glass as nurses adjusted the tubes beside Elena Reyes's bed. Lila sat curled in a chair, her tiny hands clutching a worn, stuffed rabbit eyes red from sleepless nights. She didn't know that the man watching quietly from the hallway had paid for every beeping machine in that room. Dr. Patel walked up beside him. "She's holding on," she said softly. "The surgery went well, but the recovery will take time. She's strong, though stronger than she looks." Ethan nodded, his gaze fixed on the old woman's face. "She reminds me of someone I used to know," he murmured. "Someone who believed in people, even when they didn't deserve it." Dr. Patel smiled faintly. "The world needs more people like her, and like the man who helped her." Ethan didn't answer. He wasn't used to being called good, and he didn't know if he deserved it. He wasn't here for praise. He was here because for the first time in years, something mattered more than profit margins or board meetings. Later that day, Lila found him sitting alone in the hospital cafeteria, a cup of black coffee untouched before him. She walked up quietly, her backpack hanging off one shoulder. "Grandma's awake," she said with a tired smile. "She asked if I saw you." Ethan looked up, startled. "She knows I'm here." Lila nodded. She said she felt it. "Grandma says kind people don't need to be seen to be felt." He smiled at that, a small, almost embarrassed curve of his lips. "Your grandma's a wise woman." "She is," Lila said. "She also told me to tell you, thank you, whoever you are." Ethan blinked. For a moment, he forgot how to breathe. She didn't know. Neither of them did. And yet somehow, Elena had sensed his presence. That night, Elena's heart faltered. Alarms screamed, nurses rushed in, and for a terrifying hour time seemed to stop. Lila stood frozen in the hallway, her hands covering her ears, tears streaking her cheeks. When it was finally over, a doctor came out and said, "She's stable again, sweetheart." She made it through. Lila collapsed into Officer Harris's arms. He'd come to check on them after his shift, and sobbed until she could barely speak. Behind the glass, Ethan watched from a distance, gripping the doorframe. He'd seen crises before, business collapses, media scandals, but nothing like this. Nothing that felt this raw. For the first time, he prayed. Not to a God he understood, but to something larger than himself. When Elena finally opened her eyes the next morning, Lila was the first thing she saw. "You're safe," she whispered weakly, brushing a strand of hair from the girl's forehead. Then her gaze shifted to the window, and she saw Ethan standing there uncertain, his hands still in his pockets. "Elena," he began softly as he stepped inside, "you don't know me well." But she raised a trembling hand. "You're the man who's been helping us." "I don't need proof. I can feel it." Ethan looked down his throat tight. "You don't owe me anything." "I know," she said, smiling faintly. "That's what makes it real." The days that followed felt different. The world seemed slower, gentler. Leila spent her mornings reading to her grandmother and her afternoons wandering the hospital gardens with Ethan. Sometimes they didn't talk at all, they just walked. Once she handed him the brass compass again. "It always points home," she said. Ethan looked at her curiously. "And where's home, Lila?" She smiled. "Where people care about you, even when you can't pay them back." He swallowed hard and pocketed the compass. A week later, Dr. Patel called him into her office. "She's ready to be discharged soon," she said. "But she'll need a safe, quiet place to recover. Their trailer isn't ideal." Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "I have a house in Pacific Heights. It's empty. They can stay there as long as they need." Dr. Patel smiled knowingly. "You sure you don't want them to know it's from you?" He shook his head. "Not yet." When Elena and Lila arrived at the Victorian home overlooking the bay, their eyes widened. "It feels like a dream," Lila whispered. Elena touched the doorframe gently. "No, my love," she said. "It feels like grace." Ethan watched from across the street unseen as they stepped inside. For once, he didn't feel like the man who built things. He felt like the man who mended them. That night, he sat in his car, under the faint glow of the bridge, and thought of the woman's words. "Kindness that asks for nothing is the kind that heals the heart." And for the first time in a long time, his own heart felt whole. A year passed, and the house in Pacific Heights no longer felt like someone else's gift. It felt lived in. The walls carried laughter now, the soft sound of Elena humming while she watered her plants and the chatter of Lila doing her homework at the dining table. The winter had been kind to them. Elena's heart was stronger, her cheeks full of color again. The doctors called her recovery remarkable. Lila called it a miracle. Ethan called it a reminder that life could be rebuilt piece by piece with kindness instead of control. He still visited often, though he pretended it was business. He'd drop off groceries, fix a squeaky step, or bring Lila new books. He never stayed long. But each time he found himself lingering just a little longer, listening to Elena's stories about her youth in Mexico, or watching Lila draw pictures of bridges, hearts, and compasses. The brass compass still sat on his desk at home. He'd pick it up whenever the weight of the world started to return, feeling its balance steady him again. Ethan's company had changed too. The boardroom, once filled with tension, now buzzed with purpose. He had restructured Ward Tech's philanthropic arm into something bigger, something personal. He called it the Compass Foundation in honor of the girl who reminded him where North truly was. The foundation funded surgeries, education, and housing for families who had fallen through the cracks. When he unveiled it to the press, he didn't talk about money. He talked about direction. Sometimes he said wealth isn't measured by what we keep, but by what we return. The media loved it. Investors respected it. But the ones who understood it most were the people it helped. And at the center of it all was a quiet little girl with bright eyes who had unknowingly changed everything. When spring came, the foundation hosted its first event, the opening of a new community center near the docks, not far from where Lila once found the silver briefcase. The building stood on land that used to be an abandoned warehouse. Now it had wide windows, painted murals, and a garden in front that smelled of lemon and sage. Ethan stood on stage looking at the crowd. He wasn't a man of speeches, but that day he spoke from a place that didn't need polish. This place exists because of one small act of courage, he said. A child reminded me that honesty doesn't just build trust, it rebuilds hope. This center is for her and for everyone who believes doing right still matters. As he stepped down, Lila ran to him holding a folded piece of paper. "I made something for you," she said. He opened it carefully, a drawing of 3 people holding hands under a red bridge, sunlight spilling between the cables. At the bottom, she'd written, "Home is the place where kindness lives." Ethan knelt and looked her in the eye. "That's beautiful, Lila." "Grandma says we're your family now," she said, half teasing, half serious. He smiled. If she says so, then it must be true. Elena joined them, walking slowly but steady. She wore a scarf that matched the color of the bridge in Lila's drawing. "I told her something else too," she said. "That family isn't just who you're born to, it's who you choose to stand beside." Ethan looked at her then, at the little girl who had taught him more about integrity than all the boardrooms in his life combined. "Then I choose you both," he said simply. They stayed like that for a while, the 3 of them framed against the noise of laughter and the hum of new beginnings. The mayor gave speeches, photographers snapped pictures, but none of it mattered. What mattered was that this simple circle of love had been built not on power or guilt, but on grace. As dusk settled over the bay, the bridge glowed gold in the distance. Lila stood by the railing, looking out at the water. "You know, Ethan," she said softly, "I think the bridge is like us. It carries people who don't even know they need to be carried." He chuckled. "You're becoming a philosopher like your grandma." "She says bridges are made by people who believe 2 sides can meet in the middle," Lila replied. Ethan nodded. "Then maybe we're all bridges." Elena, overhearing, smiled. "Yes, my dear. The world is better when people build connections instead of walls." They watched as the sky turned pink, then violet. A flock of gulls passed overhead, scattering into the horizon. For the first time, Ethan didn't feel like an observer in their lives. He felt like he belonged there, grounded real. That night, as he drove home, he glanced at the passenger seat where the compass rested. The needle quivered, pointing north as always. But this time, he didn't see it as a symbol of direction. It was a symbol of choice, the choice to give, to feel, to belong. Weeks later, a journalist visited the Compass Foundation and asked Ethan, "What's the story behind the name?" He smiled. "It's about a little girl who returned something most people would have kept. She reminded me that sometimes losing money isn't loss, it's finding your way back." The reporter laughed lightly. "And the girl, she's the reason the foundation exists," Ethan said. "She's family now." That quote made headlines. But for Ethan, it wasn't a soundbite, it was the truth. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, he returned to Pacific Heights with a small wooden box. Inside was the compass, polished and gleaming. He placed it on the kitchen table between Lila and Elena. "It's yours again," he said. I think I finally know which way to go." Lila grinned. "You sure you don't need it anymore?" He smiled back. "I have something better now, people who keep me pointed the right way." Elena reached over her hand, covering his. "That's what family does, Ethan. It keeps you steady." They spent the rest of the evening talking, laughing, and sharing soup around the table, the sound of life filling every corner of the house. The city lights flickered through the window, and from where they sat they could see the faint outline of the bridge, strong, unbroken, and gleaming against the night. Before bedtime, Lila whispered a quiet thought almost to herself. Grandma was right. Some treasures aren't found, they're returned. Ethan looked at her and felt that truth settle deep inside him. The man, who once forgot how to feel, had found everything he didn't know he was missing: love, purpose, and a family not bound by blood, but by choice. And under the glow of the Golden Gate, the city that once felt cold finally felt like home. When you look back at the story of Lila Reyes, her grandmother Elena, and the man who once forgot how to feel it, isn't just a tale about poverty, luck, or generosity. It's about the quiet power of doing the right thing, even when no one is watching. A 6-year-old girl living under the shadow of the Golden Gate Bridge carried more moral courage than men who owned cities. She found a suitcase filled with enough money to change her world, and instead of keeping it, she chose honesty. That choice set off a chain reaction that didn't just save her grandmother's life, it rebuilt another human being's heart. Ethan Ward, a billionaire hardened by success and loneliness, was transformed by an act of innocence that asked for nothing in return. Over time, what began as a moment of honesty became a lifetime of healing. The old woman who taught her granddaughter that money earned with dirty hands will never bring peace lived to see her wisdom proven true. The girl who once picked up bottles now helped open a community center that lifted others out of hardship. And the man who once measured his worth in numbers learned that wealth is worthless if it isn't used to make life better for someone else. They didn't just find each other, they chose each other. Together they built a family not defined by blood, but by choice, compassion, and gratitude. It's easy in a world as fast and divided as ours to believe that one good deed doesn't matter, that honesty, kindness, and empathy are too small to change anything. But stories like Lila's prove otherwise. Every act of integrity sends ripples farther than we imagine. A single decision to do right instead of easy can alter the lives of strangers, soften hardened hearts, and remind us what truly matters. We don't have to be rich to give, and we don't have to be powerful to make a difference. We only have to care and act on that care even when no one else does. In your own life, maybe you won't find a briefcase full of cash, but you will find moments when the choice between right and wrong, selfishness and compassion becomes clear. Those moments define who we are. You can be someone's Ethan Ward, the person who uses what they have to lift someone else. Or you can be someone's Lila, the person who reminds the world that doing right is still possible. We are all bridges connecting lives through small, honest acts that carry others when they can't carry themselves. If this story touched you, if it reminded you that kindness still matters, that integrity still has value, then let it stay with you. Let it change the way you see the people around you. Choose empathy over apathy. Choose honesty over convenience. Choose to be part of the good that still exists. And if you want more stories like this, stories that inspire, heal, and remind us of the best parts of being human, then don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Your support gives us the strength to keep creating meaningful content stories that speak to the heart and restore faith in the goodness we all have inside. So hit that subscribe button, leave a comment about what this story meant to you, and share it with someone who needs a little hope today. Because sometimes all it takes is one story to rebuild a heart, or maybe even the world.